It was Max Verstappen first out of the blocks on Friday. You could just sense the energy of Max just wanting to get on with it. It's 2 weeks, suddenly a long time. When you've done a triple header and you've got to sit around for 10 days, that is quite a long time to kick your heels. So Max straight out, and always interesting, I think, to look at the driver's first flying laps on a brand new circuit. Doesn't mean that much because simulators do so much in advance. But nonetheless, there is that business of commitment, particularly on a circuit where there are very high speed S's with concrete walls, lots of blind entries. And this is something I think we need to be talking about tomorrow going into the race, because we're certainly going into qualifying as well, because a lot of slow laps are needed to get these tyres up to temperature. That's what we saw today. And it was quite spooky on board sometimes on a quick car, and you suddenly come around a blind fourth, fifth gear corner and you see a slow car in the middle there. Generally speaking, I thought the behavior of all the drivers was excellent today, and that goes down to the radio communication to the drivers and the GPS systems and everything else they're running, the warnings, and I think they're all very aware of the speed differentials and the blind corners at this circuit and potentially what could happen. And touch wood, there were very, very few incidents today, far fewer than we saw at Baku, for example. We see at Baku every year. And I was just on the point of thinking, I don't think I've actually seen anybody spin when, first of all, Nikita Mazepin had a spin, pretty harmless, inelegant spin, fairly typical. But then FP2 was brought to a premature halt to the tune of 4 minutes being lost when Charles Leclerc lost the back end of his Ferrari and went off into the wall on the other side of the track. A bit more of that in a minute, of course. So Max very quick out of the blocks, 33.6, 31.7. He was doing that before Lewis was even in the Mercedes out on track. Didn't really mean anything at all because Lewis really got it together beautifully over the 2 sessions. But for a while there, Max was just like, well, where is everybody else? He was 2 seconds a lap quicker than anyone. But if you look at the first laps of the 2 Mercedes drivers, Valtteri 33.0, Lewis 33.2. Now, arguably, there was more grip at that stage because they went out later. They're not stupid, are they? But it was quite fun to watch Max in those very early dirty stages with stuff coming out of the sides and the back of the Red Bull showing, yeah, here I am, this is a very important race for me. So that was the start, but then significantly perhaps when Max went to the soft tyre, he didn't go any quicker. In fact, he went slightly slower. This is the morning session, so the afternoon session as the sun was going down. And that's when Lewis went out and put in some really quick laps on the soft tyre, looking fabulous around the circuit, and ended that FP1 quickest 29.7, Max 29.8. Top speeds, not too much of a talking point this weekend. Looks like everybody's running the same amount of top speed, around 315 to 320. Max not as quick as the Mercedes in the morning, 315, and Lewis on his quickest lap on his own, 321. And this afternoon there was again about 3 kilometers in it. Lewis on his quickest lap, 323, Max 320. So in FP1, Lewis is always slightly quicker than Valtteri. Both Mercedes look very, very strong. And for a while, Lando Norris was actually P4 for McLaren Mercedes, but then they remember that they're supposed to put him on the full tanks or whatever they do to keep him out of the times on Friday, and he quickly sunk without trace as the day progressed. But Lando will be back tomorrow, as he always is. And then there were the 2 Ferraris looking a little bit more competitive than they did at Qatar, but very early days. We had a very short glimpse, we had a very small glimpse of a full fuel run at the end of the first session. Lewis was quickest, easily 34.3. We didn't see Max out on fuel. I think at this point he was trying to work out, or Red Bull were trying to work out, why the red tyre, the soft tyre, wasn't giving him the improvement that it should have. And Max spent a lot of the day then, particularly going into the afternoon, talking about balancing the tyre temperatures front to rear and doing a lot of slow laps, just trying to find that sweet spot of temperature front to rear. He'd get the fronts right, then the rears would go off too quickly, etc., etc. So that was where Red Bull went for the rest of the day, really, and they even got to the point where they compromised some of their full tank running towards the end of the day in order to get that balance right. And if anything, I think that just shows that they're right on the edge of downforce versus top speed, and they've got very little window with which to play in terms of putting on a bit more downforce and getting the balance right, whereas Mercedes have got that extra downforce now that seems to have been the pattern over the last few races, well, particularly when they've got top speed to play with, of course, to give away, and that is something that's helping them get the tyre balance right. But very, very slow laps by most of the field to get the tyres up to temperature, particularly the soft tyre. The evening session, which was held about the same time the race will be staged, again the 2 Mercedes looking very, very good. Valtteri taking a little bit longer to get the tyre balance right. Lewis getting out there, getting all his times done very early on in the session and allowing him to get out and put in, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 runs, 8 laps on, and with a couple of slow laps in between with a heavy fuel load towards the end of the foreshortened session. He did a lot more fuel runs than any other driver in the field. Quickest lap 33.8, 33.7. Looked really good with fuel on board. Looked really good with sparks and everything as well. And by comparison, Max did, unusually for Max, because normally Red Bull are very diligent here, but he only got in effectively 4 reasonably quick laps, the fastest of which was a 34.8. And Lewis's top speed with fuel, 296, about the same as Max, 296. So about a second a lap quicker, the Mercedes, at the moment on fuel, but then Red Bull and Max don't seem to have done anything like the same amount of homework and running in that area. So we shouldn't read too much of that, read too much into that at the moment. Two of the most interesting things that came up in that session, I thought, were the graphics. One showed Lewis and Max going into turn 13, which is this cambered long left-hander, lovely corner. It was interesting because, as we've always said, they're both early breakers, and they were both braking similarly early at about 115 meters. But the interesting thing is that Max comes out of the brakes slightly sooner than Lewis and gets on the power slightly later. And that's when they were on soft tires with no fuel. So that was an interesting comparison. And then the other one, just underlining how early Max is braking and therefore how early Lewis is braking as well, was another graphic which showed braking into turn 1 comparison, Max Verstappen with Sergio Perez. And would you believe Sergio braking 10 meters later than Max? Again, this is on a light fuel load on soft tires. 10 meters, that's a lot. But again, Max quicker through the corner. Why? Because in coming in with that panic stop 10 meters later than Max, oh my God, he's actually braking harder than Max and taking more speed out of the car. And this comes back to the video that I did a while ago now. If Max Verstappen is such an early braker, why is he so quick? And of course it is because he's getting that very stable platform, and that is how he drives. I mean, from that moment on, he's just all touch and feel and doing it right. So yeah, that just underlines everything we've been saying really. 10 meters, it's a lot, you know. And I think it comes under the heading of, you know, there's a lot of drivers out there who are late breakers. Carlos Sainz is another. I'm sure Yuki Tsunoda, I haven't really seen numbers for him, but I'm sure he's a really late breaker as well. And that's because it's something on which you can focus, and it's a very tangible thing. I want to brake later than my teammate. But of course, it doesn't take into account all the things we talk about, how you come out of the brakes, what the car's doing at that point, how efficiently you're stopping the car as well, if you're jabbing the brakes really hard and you're making it unstable. The session came to an end with this big shunt for Charles Leclerc. He he was going through a left hand, he lost the back end, the right rear came out, and then he just went off on the other side. One of those things where it sort of dug in. Didn't look nice at all in terms of the type of spin. He didn't have time to do one of those. Hit the wall pretty hard. And I suppose this needs to be seen in the context of all the work the mechanics did before the race on Saturday night going into Qatar, when, as we said, Charles just did not know why he was slower than Carlos, and they put in a new chassis and everything else you need for that, a new survival cell. And he went pretty well in the race. Towards the end of the race, he was as quick, if not quicker, than Carlos, and caught him, actually, even though he started a lot further back on the grid. So that's the car now that's been shunted. It'll be interesting to know what they do in terms of the next survival cell, or whether that survival cell is okay. It probably is, actually. I can't imagine they're going to be replacing that. But anyway, we'll wait and see on that. I think, you know, with the dust settled a little bit after Qatar, and looking at it again and thinking about it again, I suspect the real problem in Qatar for Charles Leclerc is that he wasn't getting the tyres into a sweet spot in the way that Carlos Sainz was. And I'm not sure Carlos knew how or why he was doing that. It was probably just the way he drives with these slightly longer corners, getting on the power a bit earlier. And Carlos getting that temperature and therefore having more grip and therefore having a better balanced car. Whereas Charles Leclerc was not really ever getting the tires up to temperature until he got to the race and did those long runs in the race and finally got temperature in the tires. And I think that was, if that's reality, then the switch of chassis was probably a bit of a misleading thing. And it's, you know, it's not the first time we've seen racing drivers think that the car feels a lot better with a different chassis. So it'll be interesting. I don't know. I'm just sort of kind of rambling on there and ruminating about it. But I think the problem for Charles Leclerc at the moment is a bit deeper than there's something wrong with my chassis. Because I don't think there is anything wrong with a carbon chassis like that. I just don't imagine that it can make that much difference. I suspect under the surface, it's more to do with the usual thing at Ferrari, where Carlos is, he's the favoured son, isn't he? He's the one that's been employed by the current management, as distinct from Charles, who's the previous management. That's point number one. Point number two, Carlos is a very cool Hollywood Formula One driver. Everybody loves him. And he's a great dad as well, and his family. Charles is different. He's a different sort of guy altogether. He's a little bit more reserved. He's not quite as flashy. Flashy is the wrong word. He's not quite as, I don't know, what is the right word? Cool, I suppose. He's different. And I think we're seeing the beginning of the politics at Ferrari starting to get into Charles' mind. Of every time Carlos is quicker or as quick or wants to go in a different direction, I suspect, and this is only me, I suspect that Ferrari are listening more to Carlos than to Charles. And that will annoy Charles, of course, because, he's a Grand Prix winner already, as we know, and he is very, very good, very quick. And he won't know how to deal with that, I don't think, other than just to keep his head down and keep racing. It's a difficult, Carlos Reutemann went through this situation at Ferrari in '78, exactly the same thing. You're doing a brilliant job, and yet there's that undercurrent. And even though Il Commendatore, Enzo, is no longer with us, I think that ability for Ferrari still to do that remains. Whether or not that shunt today was in any way related to that, I very much doubt. I think it was, Charles, not the tidiest of Friday drivers. Lewis went through that phase for a while, seems to have got better. It seems to have got better in terms of not doing silly things, but sometimes not as quick as Valtteri, although he looked really good today. But I think but Charles does make quite a lot of mistakes on Fridays, and sometimes he carries them through even onto a Saturday. And I think that's what we saw today. But I suspect, there's some frustration there with Charles as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. It could well be that Carlos Sainz grows in stature as a result of everything that's going on right now, and you're going to see a better, more polished Carlos Sainz as his career develops now, and that's a good thing for Carlos Sainz and a good thing for Ferrari. Not necessarily a good thing for Charles Leclerc, and it'll be interesting to see, I think, how that unfolds into the winter and then obviously into next year. Speaking of politics, there was also an issue over the last couple of days with a company called KINGSPAN, which was announced by Mercedes Formula One team, as a new partner involved in their sustainability program. And the chairman of KINGSPAN is going to be heading up that Mercedes sustainability thing, which is a good thing, of course. But it turns out that KINGSPAN played a role, not a significant role, and not even an intentional role, in that horrendous fire we had in London, the Grenfell fire. And as a result of that, there's been a lot of social media, and it got to the Houses of Parliament with Michael Gove, one of the MPs, saying it's wrong that Mercedes should be doing a sponsorship deal with this company, and it's disrespectful to the people who lost loved ones in that Grenfell disaster. Now, Mercedes make the point, and so did KINGSPAN, that they didn't even know that their products were being used in the cladding for this building, and that only 5% was used, and it was really nothing to do with them at all. But it does come under the heading, I think, of a Formula One team not doing its homework, because what you don't want going into what is effectively a championship deciding race, one of the more significant races in the career of Lewis Hamilton, what you don't want is something like that in any way causing any sort of distraction, because we know Lewis is very big on social media. We know he's a very conscientious person, let alone racing driver. And he won't be able to just shrug that off, I don't think, and just forget about it and focus on the race all weekend, because people will be asking him about it, even if he doesn't want to talk about it. And he will be pretty good at putting on a brave face. But I'm surprised, I suppose this is the bottom line to what I'm trying to say, I'm surprised that Mercedes made that announcement just before this, of all races. And if they didn't know about the connection with Grenfell, well, then they should. That comes at the heading of doing your homework. And to make that announcement right now, I found was was very odd. But as I say, you know, Lewis is a big boy, and I'm sure he'll be focused 100% on this weekend. And we will see as things develop how it works out. At the moment, it looks like Mercedes have got a really good car. And if they can get Valtteri up in P2 behind Lewis, I guess that is the plan, get the front row of the grid. At least Lewis has got some protection there and he can just go out and drive his race and hopefully, from his point of view, win this Grand Prix. That'll be 3 wins in a row for him this year. Equally, you know, we haven't seen the best from Red Bull and Max yet. We've seen tastes of it today, but it kind of stalled a little bit when they started to play around with tyre temperatures on the red tyre, on the soft tyre. And that obviously is what Max is focusing on, because it's pretty critical for him, if he can, to qualify front row as well. Anyway, that's all for tomorrow. See you then.